You picked up your phone 11 minutes ago to check the time. You're still holding it. You don't remember deciding to open the app. You don't remember scrolling past the first 10 posts, or the next 20, or the 40 after that. There was no decision. There was a hand, a screen, and 11 minutes that no longer belong to you. And somewhere in a building you've never seen, in a meeting you were never invited to, a team of engineers measured exactly how long it would take you to lose those 11 minutes and built the product so that it would happen reliably to billions of people every single day. This isn't a story about willpower. This isn't a story about your discipline failing. This is the story of an industry that built the most sophisticated machine for capturing human attention in the history of civilization. And the men who built it, in their own words on record, have told us exactly how it works. Let's start with the confession that started all of this. In 2017, a man named Sean Parker, the founding president of Facebook, the person who connected Mark Zuckerberg to early investors and helped shape the platform's earliest growth strategy, sat in front of an audience at an Axios event and said something that should have ended his career, and instead became one of the most quoted statements in tech journalism. He said the thinking behind Facebook from the very beginning was, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? He described the company's growth team intentionally designing features to give users what he called a little dopamine hit to keep them coming back. He said it plainly. We understood this consciously, and we did it anyway. Think about that for a second. The man who helped build one of the largest companies on earth just told you, in public, that the entire architecture was designed around exploiting a vulnerability in your brain, not as a side effect, as the strategy. He wasn't alone. Chamath Palihapitiya, who ran Facebook's growth team between 2007 and 2011, the team responsible for acquiring new users, stood at Stanford's Graduate School of Business and told the room he felt, in his words, tremendous guilt. He said the tools his team built were ripping apart the social fabric of how society works. This is not a critic speaking from outside the building. This is the person who built the machinery, describing the damage from the inside, years after he'd already cashed out. And then there's Tristan Harris. Harris spent nearly 3 years at Google with the formal title of design ethicist, a job that existed because a major tech company recognized internally that the products it was building needed an ethical check. In 2013, he wrote an internal presentation that he sent to his colleagues, warning that Google's products were exploiting psychological vulnerabilities in 2 billion people. He left the company in 2015 and co-founded an organization called the Center for Humane Technology, made up almost entirely of former employees of Google, Facebook, and Mozilla, people who built the tools and then walked away to warn the public about them. Harris said something to CNBC in 2018 that captures the entire premise of this video in a single sentence. We're pointing the most powerful supercomputers in the world at our brains to suck the attention out of it. The most powerful supercomputers in the world, pointed directly at your brain. That's not a metaphor. That's a literal description of the resources, the engineering talent, and the data analysis being deployed, every single day, continuously, with the specific goal of extracting your attention and converting it into revenue. So how does the machine actually work? Because here's where it gets specific. And here's where you'll start recognizing your own phone. In 2014, a Silicon Valley consultant named Nir Eyal published a book called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products. It became required reading inside nearly every major tech company. It was built on research from a Stanford professor named B.J. Fogg, whose behavior model had already become foundational training for an entire generation of product designers, including, according to Fogg's own account, the co-founder of Instagram, who took his class directly. Eyal's framework has 4 steps, and once you understand them, you'll see them everywhere you look. Step 1. The trigger. Something cues you to open the app. At first, it's external, a notification, a buzz, a red dot. But the real goal, Isle wrote explicitly, is for the trigger to become internal. Boredom, loneliness, uncertainty. A few seconds of silence in a conversation. The product is engineered so that the feeling itself, not the notification, becomes the cue to open the app. Once that happens, you don't need to be reminded anymore. Your own emotional state does the company's marketing for them, for free, for the rest of your life. Step 2. The action. The behavior has to be as frictionless as possible. One tap. No thinking required. This is why opening Instagram takes less effort than making a decision about what to eat for lunch. The engineering goal is to make the action easier than the thought of not doing it. Step 3. And this is the one that matters most. The variable reward. Here's where the story gets genuinely dark, because this mechanism didn't originate in a tech company. It originated in a psychology lab in the 1950s, where B.F. Skinner discovered something about how pigeons respond to reward schedules. Pigeons given a treat every single time they pressed a lever would press it occasionally, when they wanted the treat. But pigeons given the treat unpredictably, sometimes after one press, sometimes after 20, pressed the lever obsessively, continuously, far beyond what hunger alone could explain. Skinner had discovered, without knowing it yet, the psychological engine behind every slot machine ever built. That mechanism, unpredictable reward, is precisely what powers the pull to refresh gesture on your phone, the infinite scroll, the notification that might be nothing or might be something important. Your brain's dopamine system, according to behavioral researchers, doesn't spike most strongly in response to the reward itself. It spikes in response to uncertainty about whether the reward is coming. The not knowing is the hook. Every time you pull down to refresh your feed, you are pulling the lever on a slot machine that has been engineered by people with PhDs in behavioral psychology to be exactly as unpredictable as a casino floor. Isle categorized these rewards into 3 types. Rewards of the tribe, likes, comments, the validation of being seen by other people. Rewards of the hunt, the next piece of content, the next deal, the next thing worth finding. Rewards of the self, the small sense of mastery or completion the app gives you for engaging with it. Different apps lean on different categories. All of them are running the same underlying program. Step 4. Investment. You put something into the system, a photo, a comment, a follow, your data, your time, and that investment seeds the next trigger. You followed someone, so now you'll get notified when they post. You commented, so now you'll check back to see who responded. The loop doesn't just repeat. It generates its own fuel for the next repetition. This is what makes it self-sustaining rather than something you have to be convinced to do again. By the time the loop is running, you're not choosing to participate anymore. The participation is automatic. Trigger, action, variable reward, investment, repeat. Billions of times a day across billions of people, refined continuously by data showing exactly which version of each step produces the longest engagement. But here's where you need to hold an open question, because we're going to come back to it and it changes how you see everything we've just described. If the engineers who built this knew exactly what they were doing, if they've admitted it, on record, in their own words, why does the public conversation about this still treat it like a personal failing? Why does the language around phone use still default to discipline and willpower, when the people who built the trap have told you, directly, that they built a trap? Let's go deeper into why this works so completely on a brain that evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in an environment with no phones at all. Your attention system was built to scan for 2 things, novelty and threat. Anything new in your environment, anything unexpected, used to matter for survival. A sound in the grass, a change in the weather, a face you didn't recognize. The brain developed a hardwired bias toward orienting immediately toward anything unfamiliar, because in the ancestral environment, Unfamiliar usually meant important. Every notification badge is engineered to trigger that exact ancient circuit. The red dot doesn't announce content. It announces unresolved novelty. Something changed, something is unaccounted for, your attention is needed. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for judgment and long-term thinking, knows perfectly well that a notification about someone liking a photo from 4 days ago doesn't matter. But the older, faster systems beneath it don't check with the prefrontal cortex first. They react. And the reaction happens in milliseconds, long before your conscious mind gets a vote. James Williams, who spent years building parts of Google's advertising infrastructure before leaving the company, put it with brutal precision. He said these systems are changing people's brains by privileging our impulses over our intentions. Read that twice. Privileging our impulses over our intentions, that's not a side effect of good design. That is, according to a person who helped build the system, the entire function of the design. Now here's the part of this story that the tech industry rarely says out loud, because it's the part that exposes the actual business model underneath all of it. You are not the customer. You are the product. Your attention, measured in minutes, in scroll depth, in the precise timing of when you open and close an app, is the thing being sold. To advertisers. To anyone willing to pay for the chance to interrupt you while you're vulnerable to interruption. Every design decision inside these companies, all the way down to the specific shade of red used in a notification badge, exists to maximize one number: the amount of your conscious life that can be converted into revenue. Roger McNamee, an early investor in both Google and Facebook, a man who personally introduced Mark Zuckerberg to Sheryl Sandberg, has described those companies, in interviews, using a comparison that should stop you cold. He compares them to tobacco companies, not as an insult, as a description of the business model, a product engineered to be habit-forming, sold to the public as harmless, with internal documentation showing the company understood the addictive mechanics from the beginning. The cigarette companies of the 20th century knew their product was addictive and said otherwise for decades, until the documents proved it. The attention economy has already produced its own documents. The difference is that this time, the people who built the product told us directly, while it was still happening, instead of waiting to be subpoenaed. So now we come back to the open question. Why does the public conversation still treat this as a willpower problem? Because that framing benefits exactly one group of people. The companies whose product depends on you believing that your attention belongs entirely to you, and that any failure to protect it is a personal shortcoming rather than the predictable outcome of a multi-billion-dollar engineering effort. If millions of people start to understand that the deck is mechanically stacked, designed by the same psychological principles that built slot machines, deployed by teams that openly call this an attention economy, refined continuously through data most of us will never see, then the entire framing shifts. It's no longer about your discipline. It's about a system, and systems can be regulated, redesigned, resisted, and rebuilt. That shift in framing is the most important thing this video can give you. You already know it's not really you. You felt it in the opening seconds of this video, the moment we described 11 minutes disappearing without a decision being made. That wasn't a failure of character. That was the system working exactly as it was engineered to work, on a brain that was never built to resist supercomputers pointed directly at it. Here's what the people who built this, the same ones who confessed publicly, the same ones who built the Center for Humane Technology specifically to undo some of the damage, actually recommend. Not abstinence, not abandoning technology entirely. Specificity. Turning off notifications that aren't from actual humans waiting on you. Removing the infinite scroll wherever a setting allows it. Keeping phones physically outside the bedroom, because Fogg's own model shows that proximity is itself a trigger. The phone doesn't need to buzz to pull your attention if it's sitting within arm's reach. Choosing deliberately which loops you allow to form, rather than letting every app on your home screen build one automatically. None of this fixes the system. The system was built by people with more resources, more data, and more behavioral expertise than any individual will ever have access to. But understanding exactly how the trap works is the first piece of leverage you've ever had against it. You can't out-discipline a team of PhDs running thousands of experiments on millions of users to find the exact red that makes your eye twitch toward a badge. But you can refuse to participate in the parts of the loop you're now able to see. You picked up your phone 11 minutes ago to check the time. You're holding it now, at the end of this video, having spent those minutes differently, on purpose, with your attention directed by your own decision rather than someone else's design. That's not nothing. That's the entire difference between the world the attention economy wants you to live in and the one you actually have a claim to. The supercomputers are still pointed at your brain. They didn't go anywhere, but now you know they're there. And knowing where the trigger sits is the first step toward deciding, deliberately, whether to let it fire.